Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Yoshi Domoto. I'm the Executive Director of the Japan America Society at Georgia. I am so happy to have so many people with us today for our webinar series, Executive Dialogue Series. Today, we have a wonderful program featuring the impact of COVID-19 on Japanese companies and also economic development. We have three very special guests and our moderator as well. We have from JETRO Atlanta, Mr. Takuya Takahashi. Hello, Takahashi-san.
Hi, hello. Thank you.
And then from the Georgia Department of Economic Development, Mr. Scott McMurray. Hello, Mr. Scott.
Good afternoon, everyone.
And then our esteemed moderator, the chair of the Japan America Society at Georgia and the CEO of Hodge Consulting Services, Mr. Al Hodge.
Good afternoon.
And without further ado, we only have about an hour to discuss our important topic today, so we'll go right into our program. Mr. Hodge, if you can get us started, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Certainly, I appreciate that. And we really do have the experts with us this afternoon to talk about Japanese investment in Georgia. And of course, we are all so proud of the fact that Japan, as a country, the businesses from Japan have created the environment, along with, of course, the state of Georgia and great leadership at the state and communities level throughout the state. Japan is the #1 investor for international companies in Georgia. So we're very, very honored with that and for that. And part of what we want to talk about today, of course, is what do we do from here? How do we make certain that our Japanese friends in business are taken care of? How do we make certain that as we go forward, we take care of the existing and attract more? And a friendly reminder that as important as it is for Japan investing in Georgia, we are very happy, of course, that Georgia companies have quite the good reputation and an important legacy of investing in Japan. So this goes back for several decades. Jimmy Carter and YKK and Murata led the way with both leadership and direct investment, and that continues today. Governor Brian Kemp, and as recently as September, Arglass Yamamura announced a manufacturing plant in Southwest Georgia. Therefore, we are continuing to reap the benefits. By the way, I am at Brand Red Studios in Rome, Georgia, and they have kindly allowed the professional services. They're a video and digital advertising service, and they really go across the spectrum for manufacturing, education, entertainment, and so forth. They also have clients such as Coca-Cola, Home Depot, Shaw Flooring, Lego, and Merck Pharmaceutical, which is very timely as well, of course, these days. Well, Yoshi's right. We want to go ahead and take a deep dive into a current snapshot of Japanese executives, business people that are throughout the United States and, of course, Japan. And JETRO conducts periodic surveys to check the pulse and to determine what issues and what opportunities there are. And so JETRO, the Japan External Trading Organization, is very ably led in the Southeast by Takahashi-san. And Takahashi, you are prepared, I think, to show us the results of the survey.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. First, please allow me to introduce our organization, JETRO. JETRO was established in 1958 as an official agency of the Japanese government. Our main objective is to promote mutual trade and investment between Japan and the rest of the world. JETRO has a network of 74 overseas offices in 54 countries, including 6 offices in the United States. I am here in Georgia, covering 6 southeastern states. We also have 48 domestic offices in Japan. They work closely with our overseas offices. And as we tackle the global crisis of COVID-19 containment, it is JETRO's primary duty to maintain interaction with Japanese companies operating overseas and to support foreign companies operating in Japan. So I'd like to share my slides. Oh, please allow me.
And as you're pulling those up, I compliment you for your leadership and JETRO. It really put so much substance with the intent of healthy two-way trade and investment between the United States and Japan, and of course, the Southeast and specifically Georgia. So your services are exceptional, so thank you.
Yes, I'm ready, yes. Yeah, back in March, the number of COVID-19 cases were increasing in the US. And more and more companies asked us how other Japanese companies were reacting to this unprecedented crisis. Therefore, we decided to conduct a series of quick business surveys. And today, I'd like to briefly discuss the key findings of our latest survey. We will be taking a look at how big the impact of COVID-19 on Japanese companies is and how they plan to proceed as a result. These findings are the result of the survey conducted between April 28th through April 30th. This is the third JETRO survey in the series, and approximately 1,000 Japanese companies have responded to the survey each time. First, let's look at the impact on sales. We asked the sales status in the past month. About 75% of respondents have stated that their sales have decreased in the past month. We asked the same question in the second survey conducted 3 weeks before, and 55% of companies reported decrease in sales. So it is a significant increase of 20 points. Approximately 30% of companies have seen sales decrease by more than half. This right? And this number was significant, especially in the Midwest, where the automotive industry is concentrated. Let's move on to the production status for manufacturing companies. Even though this is a very difficult situation for doing businesses, 15% of companies, 15% of companies have maintained their production, and 2.4 have increased their production volume. There are some reasons for it. Increase in the number of online sales, increased demand for equipment for medical device, and production of personal protective equipment among those reasons. However, overwhelming majority, nearly 80% of companies have either reduced or suspended production. The leading factor was a decrease in domestic demand. Suspension of factory operations due to the stay-at-home orders, shortage of workers, and delays in receiving materials followed this answer. Next, let me talk about reopening and Japanese companies' future. We asked when they expect to reopen their business. More than 1/3 of companies expect to reopen in May, while another 30% expect it after June. We also asked Japanese companies about the conditions necessary for resuming business at offices and factories. They could choose multiple answers. 70% of companies said the lifting of stay-at-home orders, while 50% said ensuring a sanitary work environment for the safety of employees. The most common challenges for Japanese companies was alleviating employee concerns. In addition to this, securing sanitary goods and PPE and preparing for cases if employees are infected were among the top priorities. Additionally, over 50% stated defining what the guideline for reopening the business is also another challenge. We also asked Japanese companies about their future plans in the US through the end of 2020, which many of you might be interested in. Over 60% of companies have stated they will maintain their current operations, while 20% stated they will reduce operations. Over 10% stated they are still uncertain. It means they are taking a wait and see approach. In this slide, I'd like to emphasize that it is only 0.1% that are planning to withdraw from the US. Before the spread of COVID-19, Japanese companies in the United States employed over 860,000 people, especially in the manufacturing sector. Japanese companies are the largest foreign investor with over 400,000 workers. We believe that the United States and Japan have built the strongest economic ties in the world, and that this relationship will continue. Let me change subjects now. I'd like to talk about the impact of the COVID-19 on foreign affiliated companies in Japan. In Japan, our headquarters conducted a survey similar to that we conducted in the United States. Before describing the key findings, I'd like to show you the trajectory of new cases of COVID-19 in Japan. This chart tells us that the number of new cases increased drastically since the fourth week of March. On April 7th, Japan declared a state of emergency, which was the first time in its history. Please remember that this survey was conducted between April 2nd through April 10th. 376 foreign affiliated companies in Japan responded. 60 US companies are included in this number. Firstly, let's take a look at the impact of the virus. Over 60% companies answered that COVID-19 has had negative impact on their business, while 30% answered slightly negative. Combined, 93% answered the virus had had negative impact on them. Negative was the most popular answer in all industries except for agriculture. In particular, nearly 90% of companies in transportation and tourism chose the answer. We asked the companies that answered the COVID-19 has had either negative or slightly negative impacts on them, what kind of impacts there are. The companies could choose up to 3 answers. 68.4% of the companies chose decrease in sales or orders as the nature of negative impacts. As we can see from this chart, the top 3 answers were those that reflect decrease in demand. Yeah, these 3. And secondly, let's check the difficulties in management foreign companies in Japan have under the current circumstances. Over 50% of companies answered secure or increase client or consumers. In particular, 55% of non-manufacturing companies chose the answer, the rate of which was almost 10% higher than the manufacturing. Secure the cash flow followed this answer, which reflects the company's needs for some financial support. And we also asked a question about their plans of development of business in Japan. Lastly, I will share the result. The top answer was maintain the current business, the rate of which was 37%. Even though over 90% of respondents are suffering from negative impact of COVID-19, as we saw in the previous slide, more than 20% of companies said expanding as scheduled. As one of our mission is the support of foreign companies in Japan so that they can expand their business. Based upon the result of the survey, JETRO started additional support to address their needs. For example, JETRO opened a new webpage as a portal for information in English on business support measures the Japanese government and ministry introduced. I have touched on some of the key findings of JETRO surveys. You can access the full report on our website as well as on JASG's website. I think I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you can keep that, well, I'm good. The last slide perhaps was the most significant one in that well over 60% of the Japanese companies surveyed want to maintain or expand as they are currently scheduled. And so that is great news. And then of course, some planning for expansion. So thank you, Takahashi-san, very, very timely and really encouraging. I'm not surprised, of course, with all the concerns of COVID and health and safety, that along the way, supply chain interruptions and some of those difficulties are there. Let's go back to the maintaining the current and the expansion, because that is an ideal segue to Scott McMurray. As Yoshi mentioned, Scott is an absolute leader with all things international and economic development in our state, and has done so for many years. It's not through some accident as well that so many countries have invested in Georgia, and that Japan, to be intentionally redundant, is number one, Takahashi-san. So thank you. And thank you, Scott McMurray, for the role that you and your colleagues around the state and around the world perform for Georgia to make certain that our international footprint is solid and continues to expand. With that in mind, Scott, can you give us a profile and perhaps give us a snapshot of what the department is doing, which I know is extensive, to help support existing and any indications of potential new investment?
Sure. Thank you, Al, and thank you, Takahashi-san. That's very, very interesting information there. I'm sure it mirrors, it's very similar across many, many different countries that are undergoing this pandemic. So if you're wondering what the Georgia Department of Economic Development has been doing over the last numbers of weeks, I can tell you that originally when the crisis first hit, the governor's office tasked our department with coming up with a response to the pandemic involving the personal protective equipment shortages across the United States and of course here in Georgia. So the very first thing that our department was tasked with was finding and identifying supplies of PPE anywhere they existed in the state, and to try to connect those supplies to where they were needed, mostly of course by hospitals and first responders. So that was our initial effort, and at the same time that we were doing that, we also were looking for manufacturers who could transition from their normal production to the production of critical PPE, such as gowns, surgical masks, ventilators, things of that nature. So we've been working with companies since that time. One really great success story you may have heard is a lot of times breweries or distilleries with just a little bit of change to their production methods can produce hand sanitizer. So we've had a number of whiskey manufacturers here in Georgia now making and branding their own hand sanitizer and providing that to the public, but also to hospitals. And right now we have published a database of over 220 Georgia companies that provide and or manufacture PPE that anybody can go ahead and access that database and reach out and contact them for getting supplies of this equipment. So we had to do all of that, which is, you can imagine, is not the normal everyday job that we do at the department. We also were asked by the governor under his executive order to help determine which industries in Georgia were critical and would be allowed to continue operating with some suggested safety guidelines, and also identify those companies that are non-critical infrastructure during the pandemic and could continue to operate if they followed very stringent safety guidelines that also were put out by the governor's office. So that also involved a lot of our time and effort, and again was something that the department does not normally do. As you know, we are a sales and marketing organization. We are not a regulatory agency that really ever gets involved in these types of issues, but the pandemic, as you know, it's an all hands on deck situation, and we said, yes, sir, Governor, we will do whatever it takes to save lives and to help the citizens here in Georgia.
Well, I commend you for that, Scott. You and your colleagues really did step up to the challenge, and that was a major pivot to go from the sales and marketing to making certain that the PPE needs and therefore health and safety needs of employees and of course all Georgians were met. And it's to the credit of the governor for asking for that, and then the manufacturers for being so responsive. How is other activity? Is there still some additional interest for expansions and recruitment of new?
So we continued to do our day jobs while we were doing all the critical supplies. And yes, we still continue to work. We still are working projects. Of course, as you well know, the economy has slowed down considerably. So we have nowhere near the volume of projects as we had previously. But since the pandemic hit, we have made over 7 project location announcements. And those locations total almost 3,700 jobs and more than $500 million of announced investment. And these include a 1,500 job Microsoft project for Atlanta. We have we announced an 800 job Amazon project out near the Augusta region. We had a 104 job project all the way up in Chattooga County announced recently, and one down all the way in Southwest Georgia in Bainbridge, 130 job project located down there. So we have been still continuing to work here.
Well, here's to you, and it is impactful in good times, but wow, those investments and quality jobs are even more so right now. So a nice injection of opportunity there, Scott. So here's to you and the governor and everybody else throughout the state that worked so hard. And you also have an office in other countries, including Japan. Would you share with us about that?
Sure. We have 13 international offices in 12 countries around the world, and our most significant sources of investment are the offices in Tokyo, in Munich, Germany, which covers all of Europe, and also in Seoul, South Korea. And those folks, we've been talking with them constantly. As you know, the pandemic has hit different countries at different times with different levels of severity, as well as folks having different rules or issuing different shutdown periods. So the supply chain has been, as you know, has been very disrupted all over the world. So we're keeping in touch with our offices in those countries to keep tabs on what's going on in the supply chain.
Excellent, excellent. Takahashi-san, with the interest of companies in Japan investing somewhere in the US, what could we do, and I'll ask Scott his perspective as well, what could the state, what can community leaders do to make certain that there is consideration, of course, favorable consideration of the state and local communities. And I know that you work on two-way trade. So what can business people do as well to tap the resources of JETRO?
Yeah. Yeah, as you mentioned, JETRO promotes a two-way trade, investment in Japan and investment in foreign countries by Japanese companies. But even though this is a difficult time at COVID-19, we have to continue supporting Japanese business, Japanese companies operating in the United States. So, for example, we will continue providing necessary information in Japanese for reopening businesses on our website and organizing business assistant webinars for Japanese companies. The day before yesterday, we organized a seminar on legal issues about reopening business here in the United States. So it is highly appreciated if you could share any information you believe would be helpful for Japanese companies in your community. We are more than happy to include this information in our updates. In response to this difficult situation and to provide support to Japanese companies that have been impacted by COVID-19, JETRO has started a consultation service in the US. We have teamed up with local experts such as lawyers and accountants to provide complimentary individual consultations on, for example, on labor, legal, and tax issues encountered by Japanese companies. JETRO has also to push forward with digitalization. We have to take up new challenges in assisting Japanese companies to expand overseas by considering how we can combine digital methods, which play the leading role, with real settings, which play a complementary role. If there are any business-related virtual events coming up in your community, please let us know. We will share the information with Japanese companies operating in the US. Oh, of course, we can share this information with Japanese companies in Japan.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. And Scott, that's certainly value added by you and JETRO, so thank you. Those are very, very important services. And the Japan American Society of Georgia is happy to partner with you on getting that communications out and partnering on the services as well, so thank you. Scott McMurray-san, your perspective, what can communities do, what can businesses do to provide more opportunities?
Well, I think that the number one thing I've been encouraging our communities and businesses to do really is keep an open dialogue, keep in good communication with each other. The pandemic is hitting local areas very differently. There are some areas of this state that are seeing fairly minimal impacts, and then there are other areas of the state, I'm sure you know, that are suffering from some very severe impacts. And this means it's happening this way across the entire country and really, I think, around the world. And so in order to keep sharing best practices, companies, please let your communities know what your challenges are. What are you seeing? What questions do you have? And in turn, they may call me or us at the department, and that's great. I mean, we have regional project managers living out in all of the regions of Georgia. And the communities are in good contact with them. They are our eyes and ears on the ground. You are always welcome to contact me, or I'm sure you know Joseph Hunteman, one of our senior project managers at the department, who can also help. And Joseph is very involved in the Japanese Chamber of Commerce as well as the Japan-America Society. And I think really that's the number one thing. Find out what your neighbors are doing. What are other companies in your sector? What are they doing? I know it's a very different environment if you're working in an office where people can work from home utilizing technology versus working in a manufacturing environment, or in a warehouse, a distribution environment, or in a food processing environment. Every business has its own unique ways of doing things, and some are being more impacted than others. And so I would encourage everyone really to just keep in good communication, and by combining resources and by sharing best practices and good information, we will get through this together.
Thank you. That is, again, very encouraging and very practical advice for communications among, and again, that communications goes from the business community to their local leaders and state, and similarly, if local leaders, they're really compelled to make certain that they keep even closer touch right now with our Japanese and our other companies, of course. So thank you for that advice. In a few minutes, we're going to open up for questions. And Yoshi, if I recall correctly, folks can tap in to the screen, and in the Q&A tab at the lower part of the screen, if folks would like to put in questions, we'll be happy to ask those questions of our panelists. On a personal note, Scott, when did you actually become aware of Japan? What's your short story of your specific interest in Japan?
Sure, I guess it's a little embarrassing maybe, but I was in college. I was very interested in Zen Buddhism and began to read a lot of books about Japanese Zen Buddhism. And also I was interested in baseball. So I read a lot about Japan, the baseball leagues, especially high school baseball. And then when the chance came to apply to the JET program, I jumped at that and was able to experience Zen Buddhism and baseball while I lived in Japan.
While teaching in Japan?
While teaching in Japan, that's right.
And you lived there how long?
8 years.
8 years, which again goes to your expertise. And so Georgia is indeed fortunate to have your professionalism and your experience directly in Japan at all times, but especially, of course, times like these. By the way, my first experience was in the first grade. I was growing up in Savannah, Georgia, and our principal of our elementary school had just gotten back from Japan for her summer trip, and she told us all about it, and at some point I could share. And I am under the impression that there's a kindergartner who is watching us today, Matthew Gordon, and an elementary school student, Livy Gordon, who is being exposed to Japan through the auspices of Japan-America Society of Georgia, and of course JETRO and the Georgia Department of Economic Development. And Jessica, I'm also going to call on you. If you can unmute and share with us the charter school story.
Sure. I am always happy to talk about the charter school. The Georgia recently, just 2 years ago, opened the first Japanese English bilingual immersion charter school. And it is open to kindergarteners through 5th grade. It's a charter school, so it's completely free, to free tuition for any student that lives in the state of Georgia. It is a state charter school, so that means anybody who lives in the state is welcome to attend. And students spend approximately half of the day immersed in Japanese, the other half immersed in English. And you may think that that's just language, but actually the students are learning math and science and social studies, all the subjects, art, in both languages. And we have the highest percentage of non-native English speakers in the state of Georgia at that school. So about approximately 50% of the students at the school are Japanese, or, you know, non-native speakers of English. And then of the English speakers, those students actually represent over 20 countries. Their backgrounds are extremely diverse. So even though they're classified as English speakers, their parents and families come from all over the world. So it's a microcosm of the entire global economy right in Peachtree Corners.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you for that. And I know that you've been an integral part of that success story. So thank you very much. And I will remind everyone that you can submit your questions and answers. And before we do that, either Takahashi-san or McMurray-san, are there particular sectors that the state and local communities should be observing at this point for helping and also for potential expansion and new investment?
I'd be happy to take that question then. Yeah, number one thing that we're telling all of our communities is, first and foremost, we need to help our existing industries get their workforce back in place, get back up and running, whatever we can do to help the folks who are here right now. And when we talk about new opportunities through this crisis, because every crisis does give birth to various opportunities, what we are seeing right now and what we are hearing from our site selection consultant friends are, number one is e-commerce. E-commerce is exploding now and is only projected to keep growing. Whether that is back office or technical services or the actual distribution of goods from warehouse. E-commerce is definitely a growing sector. As you might imagine, life sciences is also going to be growing. It's growing now. It will grow quite a bit more. Medical devices is another area where we're seeing a lot of interest. Food processing usually for us here in Georgia anyways is usually fairly steady, but we will continue, I think, to see an increase in the number of food projects, as well as areas around food safety. Robotics is going to be another big, I think, increase in robotics manufacturing. So many companies now are turning to automation. Again, the pandemic is only accelerating that trend. And then data centers as well. As we move to more technology like we're doing right now, we will continue to see a need for data centers.
All right. So that's also a signal to communities to have more international languages, and of course, certainly Japanese language, as well as technology. One without the other doesn't work so effectively. So that's a great cue there for local communities.
I totally agree with Scott-san. And speaking of new opportunities, business opportunities, I think for the time being, companies may not be able to use the traditional methods such as trade fairs, business matching events, and networking to explore their business opportunities. So face-to-face meeting and travel are necessary components for some aspect of business to proceed effectively. However, consumers and potential business partners are able to move more quickly in some cases online to enhance and strengthen relationship in other ways. So if Japanese companies take the global crisis as an opportunity to shift their stance in a digital manner, they will get more opportunities. So they need the new technologies. So JETRO have decided to organize like virtual pitch events where US companies, innovative companies can explain what are their what their products are and what advantage they have. For example, the next week, we are going to have organized a webinar, J-Connect webinar, we call it. And it will be next Tuesday, May 26th, and where three US companies of Midwest will explain their services. And we would like to it series. So I hope that companies in Georgia will participate in the future. At this time, next week, they are going to talk about smart manufacturing. So the Japanese companies operating here in the United States are very interested in hearing or collecting information about the technology or innovation.
That's a great idea, and what a great service. And thank you for opening the door for perhaps the Japan-American Society of Georgia to help you identify companies that could participate in that kind of way. That's really a valuable service, Takahashi-san. Thank you. And it starts next Tuesday for be the first one. Okay, all right. And JETRO.org and JASG are ways to connect to learn more of that information. Okay, again, it's very, very helpful. We have a question coming in from our participants, which is for both Takahashi-san and McMurray-san, and it relates to reshoring. And I think there's some Japanese investment incentives from Japan, but also a keen interest in reshoring from a variety of countries, supply chain management and so forth. Takahashi, your perspective about that?
Yes, supply chain. I'd like to speak a little bit about supply chain. In our latest survey in the US, approximately 10% of companies that have less than normal production stated. I will share my screen. Okay. And approximately 10% of companies that have less than normal production stated that the supply chains have been affected due to delay in receiving materials. You can see 8%. So leading factor was a delay in increasing materials from supplies in the US, which combined to, which climbed to 64%. And additionally, more than 40% stated delays in receiving materials from Mexico. It is assumed that this was mainly due to the shutdown of factories in response to COVID-19 for both countries. If we had asked the same question in February or March, the result would have been totally different, and delay in receiving materials from supplies in China would have been a leading factor. Speaking of situation in Japan, COVID-19 has made it harder for Japan to import masks and medical equipment that had previously relied on imports. So supply chain generally speaking, supply chain for manufacturers have grown increasingly complicated. Today, products are no longer finished in a single country. So this is a result of companies' efforts to optimize production. So I think that diversification will be the key in future supply chain. After the end of COVID-19, companies should consider the balance of various factors such as security, efficiency, and cost, etc. Thank you.
Takahashi-san, again, timely and wise words there. Very, very timely. Thank you.
And Scott, along those lines, we have a question for you, regarding supply chain. It is from our friends in Dallas, Fort Worth. So without disclosing any secrets, the Japanese government is calling for Japanese businesses to move more of their supply chains back into Japan. How is economic development and trade officials in Atlanta and Georgia reacting to this?
Well, welcome. Hey, y'all there in Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. I didn't know we had people calling in from there. That's great. We just had a couple of calls recently about supply chain with some consultants who have been, of course, talking to their clients. And up until this point in history, really over the last couple of decades, supply chain has all been about cost and efficiency. After the great supply chain disruption from the tsunami back in 2011, there was definite production disruption here based on not being able to get supplies, particularly in the automotive sector. That started companies thinking about not necessarily efficiency and possibly relying on one sole source of supplies in order to drive down costs. Now the buzzword is supply chain resiliency, having multiple supplier options, having multiple routes by which you can get the goods, whether it's by air or ocean or from one part of the world or another part of the world. Companies, of course, are always looking to minimize their risk. And this global pandemic has really exposed a lot of risks that are inherent in the current supply chain. So we see in many countries are focusing on returning or repatriating some of the critical infrastructure that is really a part of national security. This country also relied on imports of PPE from China and other countries, and we did not really focus on making those products here in the United States. I think all countries are going to start to look to do that for their own security. And we do see companies across the board beginning to think, let's get all of our suppliers, at least in the manufacturing, as close to our factories in those countries where we sell and make our products as much as possible. So we do see opportunity there. We do see more of these international companies reaching out to us over the coming year or two, saying, help us recruit some of our suppliers to come here to the Southeast.
Very not surprising, of course. And actually, many of the questions that have been coming in, Yoshi, have been about supply chain management, which also relates to what Takahashi-san and McMurray-san have just described. So thank you for that information. Additionally, we have a question about pivots. Scott, you mentioned companies that have pivoted earlier related to PPE. For companies that are reacting as compared to companies that haven't reacted or haven't reacted yet, what are the ultimate leadership differences related to that? And Jessica, you may want to participate in that part of the answer as well.
Yeah, thank you, Al. That'd be great to hear from Jessica, because she and I have talked about what YKK is doing. It's interesting when we talk to companies about switching or pivoting over to supplies. Some of them can do it very easily with kind of minimal investment. Other ones are saying, well, I can approach, the owners of the company or the board of directors to do some more investment, to do something that's a little bit outside of what we normally make or produce. But I need to have a business case for doing so. You need to show me that there will be demand for this product beyond just the next few months when we get through the crisis. And so that's been a challenge as well. And of course, that's totally understandable. No one is going to go, make things at a loss and potentially get themselves out of business. So again, it really depends on the circumstances of each individual company. One of the things that we've been telling them, though, is that for things like masks and hand sanitizers, and particularly on the masks, all first responders are going to need them. All states are going to need to stockpile these. I mean, the federal government needs to, when the crisis, as it's beginning to hit some of the southern hemisphere countries, India, Brazil, places like that, will be able to export masks to those countries. So without actually having hard data and hard numbers, it seems to us that there is the demand for these types of products will continue for years to come now.
All right, excellent. All right, thank you. Takahashi-san, any perspective on that, or do you want to pass?
I understand that the state of Georgia has established or created a web page where the companies can register the products they can produce, for example, masks or face shields. So we shared the link, this page, with Japanese companies operating in Georgia. So I think that some of the Japanese companies already have started to produce some equipment or masks, but I hope that other countries will participate in this activity.
All right, well, thank you. Well, both McMurray-san, Takahashi-san, your information has been truly valuable and is the kind of information that is practical. You've identified some resources: JETRO, Georgia Department of Economic Development, Japan American Society of Georgia as resources. So thank you for that. We appreciate the strong partnership that exists between and among us. We have had another question. This pertains to Wi-Fi and so forth for connectedness, especially in rural Georgia. What I would ask the person who has asked that question, if she would contact me or Scott offline or the Georgia Department of Community Affairs. There are some resources that are available and are increasing related to Georgia's very strong leadership and interest in expanding broadband throughout the state of Georgia. So that's a short version, but whether it's the Department of Economic Development, Department of Community Affairs, or you can contact me either through Hodge Consulting Services, not for a fee, of course, or Japan American Society of Georgia, and they can contact me as well to help answer that question. There's some a growing number of resources available for broadband expansion. So thanks for that question. Well, Jessica, you may want to help answer the question about the pivot, and then you and Yoshi can wrap us up. But in the meantime, thank you all for your participation. As promised, the expertise on this panel is tremendous. So thank you for your expertise as well as your dedication. Thank you. Jessica?
Great. Thank you, Al. Yeah, so I would be happy to weigh in on that before I close this out, but just like to echo everything that Scott and Takahashi-san had said. YKK specifically was always a supplier to the PPE industry even prior to this pandemic. But what we have noticed is that this crisis has required tremendous creativity by all of the manufacturers involved. The perfect example of one thing where we've been helping out is with the automotive industry, which I think is one of our major customers, but I'm sure many of you have seen in the news how how GM and Ford and Kia and many of the automotive companies have pivoted very quickly to making face masks. Well, one of the challenges that they ran into in making these face masks is that there is also currently a shortage in the United States of elastic, which you may use to put the face masks or the face shields, I should say, the plastic on, to put behind your head. And so we also were supplying as much elastic as we could, but we are having a hard time getting elastic from our suppliers. So we had to be very creative and think, well, what other products do we have that could be used instead of that? So in our case, we were using our hook and loop product along with the plastic buckle, and that's what was going into supplying, supplying those materials to solve that problem. Another example with the increased production of the masks is we have a brass foundry in Macon that makes metal for our zippers, and we figured out that another problem that these manufacturers are having is the wire that goes on over your nose to put the mask on. Well, we have a way to produce wire. So here's another way that we are able to help out. But it's involved just being very creative and thinking about all of these companies from, you talked about the whiskey distilleries being used to making whiskey, and they're like, well, what else, how can we take what we've got and use it for a purpose where we're not really used to doing it that way. So we spent a lot of time in meetings just thinking, everybody's brainstorm, what can we do? What do we have the capabilities to do? And then how can we help? So it's been a very interesting time. All right, and so with that, I would like to thank our panelists, Scott McMurray and Takahashi-san. Thank you very much for your insights. It was a very interesting conversation. I'm sorry that we couldn't get to all of the questions. I see some excellent questions there as well. But and also thank you to our chair, Al-Haj, for moderating, and thank you for all of our attendees for attending today. Actually, I'm not sure if you're aware, but this year marks the 40th anniversary of the Japan-America Society. And one thing that we are very proud of is that Japan is Georgia's #1 foreign investor. We have over 600 Japanese affiliated companies here in Georgia, and they employ over 36,000 Georgians. So we are extremely grateful for that relationship, and our mission is to work to build that relationship into the future. So we have a lot of programming that focuses on business development, such as this one, as well as cultural and educational exchanges. A couple things that I would like to call your attention to: we have really a full calendar of events coming up, and all virtual, so you can do it right from your living room, very easy. We have a Japanese movie and docu-series viewing party that's through Netflix, and that is actually every Wednesday and Saturday. So you're welcome to watch movies together, and you can comment and engage with people that way. On May 22nd and 29th at 12 p.m., the Atlanta Mayor's Office of International Affairs will be having a virtual Asian American Heritage Celebration. We will have another webinar on May 28th at 1 p.m. on telecommunications. And then May 30th at 1 p.m., a virtual Nihongo Eigokai language exchange meetup. And that will also include a mini Japanese cooking demonstration. So if you'd like to use your Japanese or English language skills and cook at the same time, that's an event for you. We have June 6th, 9 a.m., Rajio Taiso, so you can exercise together. There's a demonstration of how to do that. June 9th, 7 p.m. will be the Kyobi Kai virtual networking dinner. And June 10th at 12 p.m., we have another International Women's Series program event that is being organized by the French Chamber. And there's so many more events to come. So thank you so much for your support, especially to our members. And if you're not a member, please consider joining us so that we can continue to offer this type of programming as much as possible. You can find out more at www.jasgeorgia.org. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Jessica. We appreciate that, of course. And I want to thank our good friends at Brand Red again, and the leadership that folks that are participating in today's webinar is enormous. So Takahashi-san, thank you for serving on the Japan-America Society of Georgia Board of Directors. Scott, thank you, and Joseph Hunteman. And of course, Jessica is our vice chair. She is the vice chair and chair-elect of the Japan-America Society of Georgia. So thank you all. Additionally, we have an exceptional exec in Yoshi Domoto. So Yoshi Domoto, please wrap us up.
Thank you very much, everyone. We really appreciate it. Valuable information, just great data from the JETRO survey. And then I think this will be something that we can build on moving forward. I think for the future, we need to know where we come from before where we can go to make sure that we are successful in all that we do. And Takahashi-san and Mr. Scott, if you just have 5 minutes, I wanted to see if you would be able to answer a few other questions. This is the official close of the program, but we are going to go into overtime if that's possible, just to answer as many questions as we can. So just one answer per person, just very quickly. The first question from our friend at Global Atlanta, Trevor Williams. This is off the record, he says. So what is happening with the SUS Japan conference? Is this still going to go on this fall? And what will be the state's FDI recruitment process because of that?
Not sure if it will go on this fall. It remains to be seen. If it does not happen, it's a shame. I mean, we always look forward to renewing friendships at that conference. You know, over the years, it has become less a source of maybe, getting a new project versus really continuing to build relationships and strengthen the ties that are between Georgia and the Southeast in general and Japan. And I think, to Takahashi-san's point earlier, I would suggest let's look at doing it virtually. There's all kinds of technology now. Joseph Hunteman just had a cybersecurity conference that they switched over to virtual, and you could actually host your own booth like you were at a trade show or a conference, and people could sign up to visit you. And then they had, ones that were the big events where with everybody tuning in. So I think we're just going to keep plowing ahead there.
Great, thank you. And Takahashi-san, so do you see opportunities for American communities to assist Japanese companies looking to focus on the U.S. and moving closer to their customers instead of shipping to the U.S. from Japan or elsewhere in Asia?
Yes. Yes. For example, I think that some Japanese companies have to reevaluate their supply chain. So they have to look for some potential providers of some products. So I think if the US companies have presented us some possibilities or what kind of products they provide, we are very happy to share this information with Japanese companies. And I'd like to add that this year, the US and Japan have the bilateral trade agreement, including digital trade, which went into effect this year. So the United States and Japan have grown to be more than mere allies. So I think there is a lot of things we can do together. So, but now at JETRO, we should create or establish some platform where Japanese companies as well as US companies could do business or could do business matching virtually.
Great, thank you very much. So that is the end of our 5-minute overtime to the minute. So thank you very much to everyone. I think the overall theme here is the best way to move forward is together. So let's all stay safe, first of all, and be healthy and stay strong. And then let's all work together, collaborate and partner together to make sure that we all get through this pandemic successfully. But thank you again, everyone. We'll be sending out a survey to all of our attendees. And if you have any questions to Takahashi-san at JETRO or Scott McMurray at the Georgia Department of Economic Development, or to our chair or vice chair, Mr. Al Haj or Ms. Jessica Cork, feel free to send those questions to the survey as well. But we look forward to seeing you at our next event. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us.
Arigatou.